be a topic that will leave each of you, whether you're in a leadership role yourself or have aspirations to grow into one, with some useful nuggets on goal setting that can really boost performance, make a real difference in talent development, and if done especially well, get all of the different members of your organization rowing in the same direction. We know that that is a powerful advantage in any competitive landscape. All right, so first, just a little about myself. Grace really did a good job teeing this up, but my name is Rick Sysol. I did grow up in the Philadelphia area, hence the Midnight Green today, and close to the AssetWorks headquarters. And as Grace mentioned, I'll be with AssetWorks for 12 years in just a few short weeks. I owe a lot to this organization. It was really with AssetWorks that granted me my first career opportunities in leadership roles. So I started out in a hybrid business development and digital marketing role. And if you fast forward to today, I now oversee a double-digit headcount team consisting of roles in business development, digital marketing, sales engineering, or what we like to call our demo experts and industry consultants, client success, and business analysis administration. So the reason I point out these different roles is because as you take on the exercise of setting SMART goals for your organization, it does first help to give some thought to how these goals might differ depending on the different strengths, expertise, day-to-day responsibilities, and even career path trajectory of the various roles on your team. So your business as a whole really should have overarching goals, but this is where you can really optimize your team's talents and achieve results together that elevate the whole organization. So assigning meaningful supporting goals that empower your groups towards some of your organization's most challenging and, even at times daunting objectives. All right, so to start off, I imagine some of you could be wondering, what is a SMART goal anyway? And that is completely fair enough. So we'll first break down each part of the acronym to better understand each ingredient. We'll walk through some real world examples that are practical to fleet organizations. And we'll also offer some recommendations and lessons learned for each. All right, so then what we'll do is we'll tie in the technology piece. So how can technology be leveraged to dynamically measure all of your SMART goals after they've been locked in? So I imagine many of you are using a fleet management platform today, or perhaps that's part of the reason you're attending today, to better understand just how closely technology can understand your strategy and goals. So we'll hit home on a few examples of key fleet operational metrics that can be effectively measured using fleet management tools. And then we will close with best practices and a recap. So this will include some tried and tested lessons, as well as recommendations for how to best implement the SMART goals mindset into your organization in 2025. The timing here just happens to be pretty impeccable. And we will also open up to share questions and thoughts during the Q&A session to wrap up for today. So let's get into it. Okay, so first let's cover, as I said, what are SMART goals and why are they critical for improving efficiency and results? All right, so let's start off with a cheat sheet. No need at all. By no means, nobody on this call, don't be planning your next tattoo appointment around this. We will be sure to share the deck with all of our attendees in our post-event communication. But what do each of the letters in the SMART acronym reflect when it comes to goal setting? So first, we're talking about having specific, clearly defined objectives. And I'll get into why that's really important to achieving buy-in. And as I said before, getting everybody rowing in the same direction. In order to have a goal, you're going to need it to be quantifiable and you need to be able to track it. All right. We don't want these to be subjective or, based off gut feel. They need to kind of be understood universally. And that starts with having a good means to track it that everybody can adopt and understand similarly. So they have to be achievable. Nobody likes to chase an unrealistic goal. So you have to kind of do your research there. We'll get into some examples of that. Relevancy. So this is going to differ for everybody on today's call. All right. So we will go through some examples. Some might seem very familiar and something that does identify as a relevant goal or objective for you in 2025. In some cases, it might just get the wheels spinning for you that, this isn't really a priority for us right now, but every business is different. And we certainly expect everybody to kind of have different takeaways from that section. And lastly, time balance. So we need to have a defined deadline for when we want these goals to be achieved, of course, as well. And we'll talk about why that's important. All right, so let's start with step number 1 here of our 5 in the acronym. So I can't see any hands at the moment, but I imagine if I asked for a show of hands, everybody on this call would point out at least one of the examples on the screen right now as an objective in your organization. So great, these all sound like great ideas in a fleet operation, but the challenge here is that there are multiple ways to cook an egg. So to borrow another food analogy, I look at these as sort of the abridged Thanksgiving family dinner version of your bigger goals. So at a high level, this is what we're trying to do and accomplish, but the how, all the different complexities, and all the fine detail on how the objectives can be best achieved is all going to really need to be shared with those who are going to be accountable, and not necessarily your family members at Thanksgiving dinner who are making some small family talk. So remember, it's really on us as leaders to empower our resources and grant them the creative freedom to devise the best plans on how to successfully achieve these outcomes. So it's also critical you start here with brainstorming at the highest level possible, because I'll hit this home a couple times on today's presentation, but no fleet management tool, or really any technology for that matter, is a real replacement for strategy, right? I really can't stress that enough. These conversations need to happen outside the software, and leaders can then leverage the tools available to them to make the execution of those strategies easier. Okay, so as you delegate these goals across your team, it really is imperative that they be clear and that they are well defined to anyone with basic knowledge in the area. So a goal does need to clearly state what needs to be achieved, whereas vague goals lead to just confusion, lack of direction, and really teams, departments, organizations not being on the same page. So they need to be specifically formulated so that even those outside your direct department and team have the same understanding of the goal's purpose, and everybody's able to pinpoint what needs to be accomplished. All right, so in a few slides, we'll also talk about how prioritization factors into this equation. So let's jump into the next leg of our SMART formula here. Okay, so the data-driven, reports-based person in me probably appreciates this one the most. So the general rule of thumb here is to develop a mechanism for measurement from the onset. So as these objectives are currently presented, you notice the key theme, they lack a level of tangibleness, right? So for instance, how do you know when shop culture is transformed or changed for the better? You can't kind of lick your finger and stick it in the air and know it, right? It needs to be measured. Across the board, they flat out lack a real target, or really a well thought out way that the goal will be measured as successful or unsuccessful that is universally understood by all parties involved. So remember, all goals need to be trackable to gauge progress. It goes without saying. So one of the concepts we push here at AssetWorks is that you need to build the means to measure success before it happens, or it's not really ready to go out the door quite yet. It's an idea. It's something that needs to be better ironed out so that we know what success really looks like. You really need to determine what your targets and timelines are, but the how is it measured discussion is most important in the interest of this section. So is it being measured by survey results or feedback? Is it a live dynamic dashboard or report that can be easily accessed in your fleet management system? Do the necessary stakeholders have access and visibility to it? Do they know the story behind the data so that if they were to pull it up at a given interval within your active goal window, will they be able to easily understand how efforts are progressing? So you want to identify this mechanism as goals are assigned, and better yet, call out those reports and mechanisms. Maybe it's a hyperlink or it's something that can be bookmarked. You're calling it out directly in the final formulated goals, so everybody's kind of pointing towards the same, North Star as to what that progress and measurable looks like. So another important consideration in all this is monitoring. Okay, so if your team is going to buy into these goals and why they're important, it probably doesn't work to review them once in January and then review results in December, right? Will there be organized check-ins to monitor the progress of how goals are coming along? It's highly recommended that you schedule that cadence at the onset. Otherwise, it is highly likely that some of those important pivot opportunities are going to fall between the cracks. If you are having regular one-on-one meetings with your teams or your departments, make sure that there is time being dedicated to set aside and review these specific goals. And it's not exclusively day-to-day updates. Those are important for understanding how you can best support your team, but don't let them lose focus of the goals assigned to them, at a higher level, and what they're really striving towards with all those different subtasks and day-to-day responsibilities. And of course, let's not forget, right? We all have a manager. That's something I feel confident all of us share in common on this call today. So your own leadership is often going to ask you about the progress of goals. You're going to want to have those answers ready at the hip. So this is why dynamic measurements and regular check-ins will help. So just kind of in closing here to wrap up the slide, defining these measurable criteria will help you assess programs and the success. And it's these measurable goals, like the ones you see on the screen, that provide insight into real performance and keep fleets on track to meet targets, right? So you're able to calibrate individual performance, team performance, and mostly identify strengths and gaps in your operation by having, goals like what you see here that are clearly measured. All right, goals need to be achievable. So another important step to formulating effective SMART goals is doing your detective work a bit first. All right, so you don't want to just throw in a blindfold and throw a dart and boom, there's your target. The goals you need, you're going to set, they need to be attainable, and it's highly encouraged that you communicate to your team members exactly why the benchmarks you set for each goal are realistic. Be open to sharing the why as to how you came to that conclusion. It'll help them buy in much easier if they know how a goal or a target was derived. All right, so let's consider a few examples here. You can see that while fuel costs, vehicle replacement, and the transition to EV infrastructure belong in the goal setting discussion for many of you, there's a glaring element here in the unrealistic goal set of Rome being built in a day, that some of these goals were set and could have been done better. So instead of leading with these rosy colored glasses and sort of an unrealistic outlook that will really just raise eyebrows for all the wrong reasons, dig into your data. Look at your bandwidth. Look at your available resources. What does your track record and historical trends suggest? So you see some better thought out targets at the bottom of the slide here. So if you're seeing a historical trend where fuel costs have decreased, for example, on average of, let's say, 7% over the past 5 years, then set a stretch goal to hit 10% this year. And when you present that 10% target, explain candidly how you arrived at that target so it doesn't come across as arbitrary, or that your team has, and that way your team also has an opportunity to voice any concerns they might have. In some cases, you may be required to implement goals that don't carry as much historical context, okay? So for example, what about a fleet transitioning to EV for the first time? It may not be an apples to apples comparison of the last time you invested in the next wave of fuel efficiency 15 to 20 years ago, right? So when working with goals that aren't repeatable year over year, like our last example, just be transparent that a one-to-one benchmark may not exist, but you are setting a goal based on the best relevant data that you have, all right, as a leader. So this likely means tighter monitoring checkpoints, in case your actuals suggest that the target is not realistic, And again, when something's new and kind of fresh and untested, it is advised you sort of tighten up that cadence so that you can identify that sooner than later down the line, before it's a lost cause and the probability of achieving that goal is really, slim to none. Another effective tactic when discussing achievability can be the concept of cascading goals. All right. So, in other words, if I'm giving my team the directive of, we're going to implement 120 plus EV fuel sites by 2030, make it clear to them that your manager is delegating the same goal to you. All right. There's a sense of togetherness there that can really go a long way. And we're in these somewhat uncharted waters together. And it's critical that we, not just you, put forth your best effort to see to it that the goal is achieved. So there should really always be a joint agreement between the employee and the leader on what the goal should be with a realistic path to achievement. So as a leader, think of it as a big opportunity to showcase the value of your team and resources while also not setting them up for failure, right? It's a bit of a balancing act, but this is why it's important to rely on data to set your benchmarks and to foster team involvement before goals are formally introduced and committed to. Okay, R in our SMART acronym is going to stand for relevant or relevancy. So here's a slide with some examples. Will ultimately look different to all of us, as I said at the beginning of the presentation. So goals need to be aligned with your priorities in your organization. So you wouldn't set a New Year's resolution to play ukulele if your main goal was to polish up on your public speaking skills. Thank you to ChatGPT for that very obscure example. But if you're going to set a goal, make sure it really contributes to key business objectives. And when you're able to achieve the desired outcomes of your most relevant goals to your organization's broader objectives, your teams are going to know that they're making an impact and their efforts truly matter. Okay. So key recommendation I could share before we go any further on relevancy. Determining that relevancy should be a shared initiative across your leadership groups. Notice I didn't say singular there. All the different leadership groups that come into play. Seek that detailed input from the onset. So make sure you're examining, all the highest overarching goals of your organization. You're effectively cascading and applying them within your department. And you're not just assessing relevancy within your specific department or team. What this can often lead to is conflicting priorities and just non-optimal outcomes at the end of the day. So in that case, even if each individual department hits its own set of goals, one group could really be zigging while the other is zagging, and ultimately goals are left compromised, and the outcomes are as well. So start with the tip of the iceberg and go down from there. As you are going through and beginning the SMART goal process here, based off of relevancy, look at all the different outcomes you'd ideally like to achieve. So you should then be able to narrow them down into buckets. Okay, so looking at some of the lower priority goals we have identified here, maybe some are deemed worthwhile, but once you get them all on paper or on a whiteboard or in a discussion, some of them start to pale in comparison to larger payoff items. You might see some examples on the screen here that kind of ring that. And you can then arrive at more careful designations like lower usage, subjective, and non-critical, as you see is outlined here, if you carefully do weigh your priorities. Don't commit to those types of goals today. It just doesn't make sense in terms of relevancy. You may even have some other nice to haves that belong in your queue, but they don't quite hit the mark of the key strategic objectives that will drive the biggest impacts to your organization. So those are the ones, the biggest impact ones are the ones to focus your focus around and to frame your goals around. So as we're now looking at some more high priority goals, you can see that these have been more strategically crafted to align with higher return on investment for dedicated time and effort. So in other words, scrap that goal on interior comfort altogether. It doesn't align with core objectives. Rather than look at driver recognition program based off subjectivity, elevate it. Elevate the program to incorporate a steering committee and align it with a 10% end of year reduction in accidents. Right? Something that's going to speak more to impact and be more relevant to performance. Or maybe you better define your advanced telematics objective to start with a smaller subset of vehicles that yield the higher predicted maintenance insights based on data science research and where other fleets have seen success early. Okay, so that just about covers relevancy. Which takes us to our last section here. So this one probably won't come as a surprise to any of us. Think about any task or favor you're asked to deliver in your day-to-day profession, right? Once it's explained to you, what exactly is needed, you might ask for additional clarification so that you can best deliver on that ask, but you're likely not going to agree to it without getting an answer to the always burning question, which is, when do you need this by? All right. This is how we maintain focus. This is how we create urgency and how we determine the items that can wait longer than others, the more pressing items that are seemingly setting our hair on fire every day, right? Deadlines are critical. If you don't set a deadline, the more likely the work doesn't get done. So not exactly rocket science at this point, as we've seen some other time-bound examples on previous slides, but adding the when to these goals will set a clear expectation with your teams. Is this a reasonable time frame? What else are you working on that might interfere with this deliverable? Are there other items that can be reprioritized? What can I take off your plate or step in and redelegate based on what is more relevant today? And depending on the deadline you set, this should also pave the way for determining the frequency at which you are revisiting the progress of each goal. Okay, so for instance, introducing a goal today that is going to be completed by the end of February, that might entail a weekly cadence or a weekly check-in, whereas goals set for the end of 2026 might be revisited bi-monthly for the time being that they're further out. So when you're meeting with your teams during these check-ins or you're assessing progress via reports and tools available to you, let them speak open-endedly about what's going well and what isn't quite on track just yet. And I'd also encourage, always ask the direct questions here. Do you feel that this update you provided still aligns with your target completion date? How might we approach this differently? Do we need to, what else can we do to ensure that this stays on track? Okay, so that concludes our walkthrough of the SMART goals model. And I really just want to reemphasize one takeaway before we dig into the next section, which is these conversations around developing SMART goals do not require any kind of fancy tools. Remember that. They really are a matter of thinking strategically about your organization and determining what is most critical and committing to specific short and long-term goals. And this is done primarily through, it's really careful brainstorming, collaboration. And while fleet management technology does not replace strategy, it can augment strategy. Remember that. So the next section will provide some insight into the role it can play in tracking the performance of these goals. Okay, so for simplicity purposes, let's start by thinking of a fleet operation and the key metrics to monitor. So, when we think of conversations we have with our customers, prospective customers as well, in a nutshell, whether it's related to your equipment or the resources needed to keep the equipment operating, you're wanting to minimize costs while also optimizing productivity. So, in looking across these key metrics you see here, it likely makes sense to have your SMART goals focus on areas like these, which consist of maintenance schedules, cost reduction strategies, fuel efficiency, and even fleet uptime. So let's start with maintenance strategies and preventive maintenance and examine how fleet management tools like AssetWorks, Fleet Focus, and other technologies out there can help fleets really see this vision through. Okay, so here you see some goals that might look similar from previously covered slides all around preventive maintenance. They all kind of follow the SMART model, which we've covered in pretty good detail up until now. So adherence to those PM schedules within a 3-month time frame, reducing your equipment downtime, and also extending the lifespan of your assets. Fleet management technology can really help you automate that tracking. So that you're basically measuring exactly how those preventive maintenance goals are being adhered to. You're going to be able to utilize these data-driven insights in order to prioritize repairs and improve efficiency. And we talked a little bit during our measurable section about real-time tools like dashboards and reporting. And in this case, layering on those alerts as well. So you can obviously tailor them and customize them to the goals of your fleet. But if something tied to a report that is tied to a goal requires attention, think of a dashboard, it can trigger a notification that those that need to give it the proper attention. And that's likely going to reveal, a pivot opportunity for you and your fleet, or really just solidify that this is an area of strength where we should keep doing what's working. All right, so how about fuel consumption and optimizing cost savings? So whether it's around just reducing fleet-wide costs, having targets around that, pre-trip fuel waste, and enhancing data utilization, there are automated fuel management tools out there that can help you to really make this pretty daunting objective a lot easier to measure and follow along with. So whether it's utilizing the data available to you to reduce travel time and fuel consumption, monitoring trends, we talked quite a bit about that at regular intervals. If you have it set up on a dashboard, that tends to act as your morning newspaper. And as I had already covered on the last slide, you can have different reports and triggers fire off of that loop in the appropriate teams that need to give it that attention when things are not aligning with the goals you have set out. And then we talked quite a bit about automating reports. So knowing the reports that tie into these goals. So it's going to be around sustainability, cost reductions, and overall fuel performance and consumption. You can see some basic reports illustrated in the screenshot there. All right, how about driver performance? So you're wanting to not only reduce unsafe driving behaviors and actually talking about the specific driving behaviors that, incidents that you're looking to minimize, utilizing the data you have, but also enhancing performance accountability. So a modern telematics solution like AssetWorks GPS, this is no longer about dots on a map and where our vehicles are out in the world or in space as you are kind of monitoring from a centralized location. Okay, you're actually able to track what's happening as far as driver behavior, triggered incidents, the unsafe driving habits and behaviors that are going to require coaching and discussions with your vehicle operators. So you can generate reports off of these right within the tools and tie them right back to the goals that we have set on the left. And as I said, as long as you're kind of monitoring these on a set cadence that is pretty regular, you're going to be in a pretty good position with proper coaching as needed to achieve those goals. All right, so we really broke down, I think, pretty effectively the different areas of SMART goals. We provided some examples, some kind of tips and recommendations around either, but here are just some other best practices that need to be considered. So continuous progress tracking, being willing to adjust your strategies based on data. So when we're talking about relevancy, we did kind of allude to this, but if and when you're setting a goal and you're basing it off of, a historical benchmark or the best comparison you have to a benchmark, if you're not exactly looking at an apples to apples comparison, you have to be willing to pivot and you have to kind of be open and candid with your teams and departments about that and your kind of flexibility as to managing the goal. The optimal outcome of that is that maybe we set the benchmark a little bit aggressively initially, but we did eventually get it right. And now we actually can rely on that benchmark more closely year over year versus, chasing something that's unachievable. All right, so these are just the other kind of measures to have in place as leaders as you exercise SMART goals within your organization. All right, so just a quick recap. So the best practices to remember for mastering these. All right, so we talked about the cheat sheet a couple slides ago, but remember, if you're going to set these goals, they need to be precise. Have them directly designed to fleet challenges. Have the methods in which you're going to measure these goals clearly defined before you even start to track the progress of that goal. Have it living in a set dashboard, a dynamic report. Have those set cadences that are going to track the progress and success. And also very important, make them visible throughout every different layer of stakeholders that needs to be monitoring the progress of these goals. Rely on your capacity and historical performance trends in order to know what is realistic within this objective. So what does my track record tell me? What kind of benchmarks do I have? Set the goals as such when you present those to your team and have that open dialogue. They're likely to be received, and embraced much closer when they can see that this is an achievable a goal that I'm being held accountable to. Remembering to strip out the software and start in, a regular conversation with your leaders. What are our top business priorities? And making sure that the goals that you're setting within the SMART goal model are really focused on the ones that yield the highest return of investment and are showing the value for your time and effort as a group. Again, nothing tends to get done unless there's a deadline. So have a clear time frame. Keep your teams focused, leverage those regular touch points as opportunities to see, does this still seem like a realistic timeline? How are we trending, and making sure that is all aligned and being flexible when needed. And we really just hit on these just 2 slides ago, but monitor the progress, encouraging your team to contribute to that goal setting. So, in other words, don't just come out and say, these are the goals I set for you for this year, this quarter. Engage them from the get-go. Help them buy into the why of why this goal is being assigned to them, why it's important, and have them really sign off on why they agree it is a priority before it's actually handed off to them and communicated throughout your organization. And then utilizing the tools we have that can help with the tracking and reporting and measuring of these goals. So that'll look a lot different to you depending on the level of sophistication you have. But it's good to have sort of the mindset that I have tools available to me that we are already invested in that can help me to do this, and should ultimately promote that, not only visibility, but adoption of SMART goals across your teams and departments. All right, so just touching a little bit, we talked a little bit about how other technology tools can be leveraged. These are just some of the advantages that our customers tend to lean on when they are setting out to achieve their own goals. So seamless data integration. Nothing can sort of hinder tracking or slow down time to reporting like disparate data sources. So having that all living in one single source of truth that everybody can access, is speaking the same language around, and is understanding it universally, really goes a long way. Adapting this to fleets of any size or complexity. So, having a robust system that can understand even the largest type of operation with the stretchiest goals, and having these dashboards set up that can measure those as well. So also we offer some adherence tools to regulations. We talk about tracking and how that can be automated, and also leaning on, dedicated experts that have been doing this for, 30 to 40 years in some cases, as long as we've been around, and many of which have walked a mile in your shoes. Having resources internally that have been fleet managers or have been technicians, have served in fleet management roles, and really know the industry well, and leaning on them. We talked about establishing relevancy. Lean on your industry partners and do your detective work, and sometimes that is in tandem with a partner like AssetWorks. And we look at these as all sort of examples of how you can prove ROI in your organization as you track these SMART goals. All right. I think that concludes what I had in store. I just want to thank everybody for their time and attention. And Grace, if we do have any questions or discussion points, be happy to field them and pick this up.
Yes. So as Rick said, if you guys have any questions, you can use the WebEx chat tool and you can send the messages and your questions to me and I will relay them to Rick. So to start off, we did have some come in. One was Go Birds. Um,
Appreciate
so
that.
yeah. Um, so the first one, assigning SMART goals at the department level would be a new concept to us. How do you recommend promoting this change?
Yeah, it's a good one. That's a good question. So I'm going to interpret that as, we all sort of look at these overarching goals, but sort of embracing the idea of breaking them up among different teams and all collectively working towards those larger highest impact goals is a new concept. And how do you sort of manage that? So I can speak a little from experience. For me, it comes down to change management as a principle, really. So change may not always be comfortable when you shift, to something like SMART goals. But remember, it's for a greater good that all must see. All right. And what I would say there is that it is on us as leaders to ensure that our teams can see that greater good. So that could mean clarifying the how of how change will benefit the organization, to them personally, how the change will be implemented. A lot of times people are going to know the inner workings and what the plan is there. And again, why it's worth it. So it is important, I think, to set a clear vision, actively involving, engage your employees through the change discussion, and proactively manage that resistance. If you're managing a team of, X amount, and you can sort of see that there might be some detractors early on, as you're having those individual conversations about departmental goals, you should expect some pushback. Not everybody is going to jump at the idea of change, but as a leader, advocate for why the goals are being pushed that way, why it serves a greater good, while also empathizing with each team member and likely developing an initial impression for how they want and will need to be supported to achieve their goals. That would be my recommendation to that.
Perfect. And another question, do you see any associated risks? Will teams performing below goals get discouraged or lose confidence?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's a fair question to be asking up front. So um, I will say one of the risks of this can be that introducing this finite set of goals might also send a message that this is all that is expected of you now, right? I've sort of consolidated into this to-do list that is comprised of both short and long-term goals. This is what I need you working on now, and it doesn't so much always touch on the tactical things that you're doing day to day that ultimately contribute to these goals. So you don't want to let this cause an overly narrow focus where other long-term outside the box creativity is stifled, I'll say. You still want to have conversations outside of the goal list. All right. In all likelihood, the added dialogue will give you perspective as a leader for future goal setting. So let's make sure we're reining it in and focusing on these, I'll say 5 key objectives that have been assigned to you and you're accountable for. But through those conversations, what else are we talking about bigger picture that as we think ahead to 2026 beyond, what do those goals look like? And make that a very two-way conversation with your teams and departments. I think that part of the question was around getting discouraged. I will tell you my personal belief on that. I am a firm believer that there is a story behind any result. So it is on us as leaders to tell that story. So, for example, if you set one of those goals for 10% year over year, excuse me, reduction in operating expenses within your department, and let's say you come up at 9%, it shouldn't be all doom and gloom at that point. reflect on that, right? Where did you see team members going above and beyond to get to that 9%? Did you see any career growth or new skill sets that were developed as a part of that journey? What were any new lessons learned, right? How can that be applied and set you up for future success? And maybe next year it's an 11% year over year reduction. So there are still positive outcomes to celebrate, even when goals are not fully recognized. So I do think that's very important to keep in mind here. Keep your focus on the goal, but also make it very clear that there's a story behind every result. So all in all, I do believe the reward will exceed the risk in pushing SMART goals. It does allow leaders to plan and facilitate roles for high performance, even as you plan for the future.
And then this is kind of a statement, not exactly a question, but you can provide some feedback. They said, I think one problem that arises with goals is locking them down from January 1st through December 31st.
Okay, I will interpret that, and if we're maybe missing the mark here, feel free to chime back in. We can definitely take another stab at this, but I'm going to interpret that as it can sometimes be a moving target. I really do think that there's a lot of truth to that, and sort of adopting that culture. I will speak from experience. Our goal setting is very cyclical here at AssetWorks, so all of our employees kind of know to expect that we're actually living it right now, right? Right now, we're basically wrapping up all the end of year results for 2024 and are spending a lot of times with our direct reports right now talking about 2025 goal setting. I should mention, not all those goals are going to be year-end goals. If there is a goal that is actually a precursor to a greater goal, we're also open to incorporating them as, say, we want that done by the end of Q1. Maybe it's a project or some heavy legwork that needs to be accomplished first in order to hit one of the higher goals on our list. Now, assuming that it is around that idea of a moving target, the dates, I would say, you're going to want to do your best to kind of stand firm in those, but the targets around those, you should be revisiting those at some of the touch points that we discussed. And again, if a goal ever doesn't get completed in time, it doesn't mean it needs to go away. I'll speak from experience. We had one of our goals that was about 95% to completion for the end of 2024. We now have all the confidence that it can be a Q1 goal to, really put a bow on that one. So speaking again to what went well with that, how did we get 95% of the way there? Here's what we learned when we didn't achieve that final 5%, but don't take it off your radar entirely, right? Keep it held accountable, and as a goal, just maybe a little bit reframed. I hope that addresses that attendee's observation, which I do think is something we all do encounter, is that that moving goalpost.
Yes, they responded and said that you were on point with their response.
Cool.
All right. So that looks like all the time we have for questions today. If you have asked a question we were unable to get to, our team will reach out to you after today's webinar. I'd like to thank you all again for attending today's presentation. I hope you have all secured some valuable takeaways to keep in mind moving forward. Rick, I'd also like to thank you on behalf of AssetWorks once again for sharing your expertise with everyone today. As you see, Rick's contact information is available here. Should any of you have any follow-up questions, I hope you all have a great day. We look forward to having you with us next time.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Grace. There's my contact information. Find me on LinkedIn. Love to pick up the discussion with all of you. And thank you again for your attention. Go Birds.